There is more than just flesh. Beneath this mask, there is an idea, and ideas are bulletproof. Hello, how are you? Welcome and welcome back to Live by Iris. I was planning to make a book haul video, but I have collected so many books from past couple months. Now I don't know where to start. So at this moment, I just feel like doing a short and chatty video. And the easiest topic I would love to talk about is my favorite subgenre, dystopian fictions. It's a genre of fictional works that usually set in future or near future where society has failed or fallen in some way. Personally, when it comes to the dystopian novels, I tend to love the ones to explore the topics of government control and loss of individualism more than any others. And often these two issues are indivisible. And I consider the ones dealing with survival or environmental destruction issues as more like post-apocalypse subgenres. I love this subgenre as well. However, I found usually for books, those are more hit or miss. In this video, I will only focus on my top 10 classic dystopian novels, so hope it won't be too long. I will make another one about the modern dystopian books maybe in next video. I'm starting with We because it's so-called the original dystopian novel. It was written 100 years ago. It's a very quick read. I read it after 1984 and Brave New World. I did see this book definitely influence on the other books, but it's still a very different story. It's very short, so I remember this one didn't give me the impact of 1984 and A Brave New World has hit me that much, and certainly less frightening. And the book is written in a form of a journal recording the thoughts and actions of D503. He's a project chief engineer. In this book, everyone is named with number. Like any of the classic science fiction, a lot of science is kind of outdated in this book, and the writing has some distracting descriptions that I felt very outdated too. But the plot holds up very well as a classic, so highly recommend. 1984. It's a very heavy copy. I read this book in high school. It's the ultimate book that have influenced my personal and political beliefs. I remember I read it in one setting and read it again and again. And I wrote a super long, maybe the only reading essay I have ever written, and then read again and again. There is no other book has that great impact on me ever since read this book. Any books, movies, video games, and anything comes to slightly dystopian vibes would get my attention immediately. There are other my all-time favorite books naturally falls into this genre ever since, but nothing compares to 1984. Whenever I picked up this book, I can read it through like the first time. Terrifying and made me think. I could never get tired of reading it. Just can't get enough with everything about this book. The plot, the world build, the writing, the characters. Everyone should read this book. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. It's another classic, amazing read. I read it a long time ago and never reread it again, so my impression is relatively more vague about this one. But I remember this book started out a bit slow, but then I still thoroughly enjoyed it. I found the characters are a little bit symbolic, and I don't like the ending. I remember I was quite disappointed about the ending, maybe because I read this one right after 1984. I just cannot help to compare. It's definitely isn't as dark as 1984, but still scary as how prophetic it is. Compared to 1984, I think Brave New World actually parallel the current world closer if I really compare. But definitely a great book. book to read. Of course, after talking about 1984 and A Brave New World, I have to mention Fahrenheit 451. I'm always torn to compare it with 1984. To me, nothing compared to 1984, even though I only read 1984 and Animal Farm by George Orwell. He is the most important author to me than anyone. However, I love Ray Bradbury. I have pretty much read anything he wrote. I hope I have read this one first. When I picked up this book, I have read many of his works already and many other dystopian books, so I enjoyed it, of course. I love Ray Bradbury's writing. It's a classic dystopian. I guess I just expected more. I found it's a little bit underwhelming and I don't care the characters that much. Still, Ray Bradbury is one of the best storytellers in my mind, so this one classic dystopian book I think everyone still should read. Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I got into this book without knowing anything, and I hope whoever picked up this book can do the same for the best reading experience. However, I know it's harder nowadays because the TV theories, and I noticed people talk about the plots about this particular story a lot. It is weird that I don't compare it with other dystopian classics, maybe because it's unique point of view from feminist and it has very disturbing nightmare vibe. It's very refreshing when I first read it back the days. This book also got me into the female authors' works. I usually had a hard time to attach to any female characters for the longest time until I read this book. I realized that I should read more female authors' works. And as a classics, I feel this book has reached far more audience because of the TV adaptations, but I still highly recommend you to read the book. Just don't think the TV format can really get you into that haunting experience with pure imagination while you're reading it. So read the book. A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. This one is absolutely shocking and disturbing read. To note it that I have read a lot of disturbing things by the time I picked up this book. Still, it's quite something. It's very unique than anything I have read. First of all, it took me such a long time to get through this book because it creates a unique language system that to read this book, it's kind of like the same time you're learning a new language. I don't know if there's any other book doing the same thing, but the whole writing is based on an old English slang, and every word is different than what I have learned. And I definitely think it's quite an accomplishment when I finish this book. And not saying the same time the plot is so sickening and brutal about the human nature. The only thing I would point out is I'm not a big fan of the last couple of chapters, which is quite disappointing and sad because I really love books with impactful endings. But still love this book. It might be kind of violent for some people's liking, so do check the trigger warning. Lord of Flies by William Golding. I noticed this book got very polarized opinions from people who have read it. I have only read this book once, but I still remember many details of this book. I think it's a very good book, a great book actually, about civilization and the wild. And it was grotesque at times about human nature, how it's pure evil. I don't like any of the characters and the pace gets slow sometimes, but it is crazy how well this book captured the dark side of human nature. This book at some aspect reminds me of Life of Pi, a lot of allegories, but Life of Pi had some positive messages at the end. And Lord of Flies is downright depressing. And personally, his writing is not my favorite style, but definitely top 10 dystopian classic for sure. Slaughterhouse-Five. This was my first Kurt Vonnegut. It's always have a special place in my heart. His writing style is very unique, clever and funny. and tragic at the same time. I reread this several times. It's mind-blowing at the time when I first read it. It's one of the books that changes my perspective on life for sure. Honestly, I'm usually not like reading anything to do with World War II, just my least liking theme. But Vonnegut managed to get me hooked on the story. And I love the ending so much. Just thoroughly enjoying reading this book forever, and I hope you do too. Blindness by Jose Saramago. I picked up this book on a whim. I was in a bookshop and came across this book. It was on the science fiction section and the cover got my eyes. I usually don't read premise at all and try to know nothing about the plot, but I do need to check the app like Storygram, that at least I want to make sure the genre falls into my favorite, that I know I won't regret the purchase. It was more of apocalypse theme, but not about survival, more of political aspect. So I consider it's dystopian, and while I'm reading it, the heaviness and the helplessness was so real. It's about a situation where an epidemic of white blindness breaks out in an unknown city. It's so dark and depressing and intense to read. I know many people love Jose Saramago's writing, his very special way of punctuation that doesn't do much to me. Maybe I need to read more of his books to appreciate more. And again, I'm not liking the ending that much. I think it was a very appropriate ending for the story. Not a surprise, but for such a great book, I really look for a more memorable ending. But overall, really a great read. Highly recommend. Remember the 5th of November. V for Vendetta. I have watched the movie and read the comics edition. This is a comic edition. I have never owned and read the novel, which I really should. But here I just want to shout out this epic story. I got married on November 5th because of the date in this book, how meaningful it is. And I also have this V tattoo on my wrist. I guess it says a lot how much this story influenced on me. This is also a very rare case that I watched the movie before the book. It's beyond satisfying to watch something so atmospheric portraying the dystopian world on the screen. This also outlines to the next book, City of Amber by Jenny Duprat. This is not in my top 10, also not in honorable mention. However, I think this is a good book for the younger audience that worth to mention. I read this book and watched the movie many years ago. Back the days, I immediately falls for the dystopian world. What I can say, here we have this world built, visually presented right here. I just cannot be too picky about it. However, last year when I read this book to my daughter and we watched the movie together, I see that how both the movies and the books are kind of rushed and too predictable, which is understandable because this book is classified as young adults, though I really thought it's more like a middle grade read, like a children's book. The plot has so much potential, but the writing isn't very engaging, very rushed. However, for the dystopian theme, it's also considered the OG, the first dystopian post-apocalypse young adult novel ever hit the market. Not sure if it's true, but this book still has special place in my heart. And 100% great for young audience to just get into this genre. That's all 11 books I have for this video. They are all timeless in the classic top 10 in my list. When I really think it's gonna be fun to just lock ourselves in, never leave the house, and read all these books one after the other. No wonder I'm not a super optimistic person. I always feel there's something going to happen. And I think these books teach me never take anything for granted. For the next video, I'm going to recommend maybe 10 more dystopian fictions that are released more recent years. I will finally get into several of my all-time favorite books, Station 11 and Never Let Me Go. And until the next time,